Compassion is not a luxury. It is a necessity for the survival of humanity. The 14th Dalai Lama, The Art of Happiness. The Daily Grind, Chapter 141. Alana felt a great deal more free than she had at the start of the month. She had what a lot of people would probably have killed for, a fresh start, but unlike most people, she hadn't actually asked for it. Or if she did, she didn't remember. Also, her fresh start had occurred in Florida. As a woman of, she presumed, culture, Alana had a general bias against Florida, and living in it had not done much to fix that. Her life since waking up had been a series of weeks in the hospital, followed by shitty part-time jobs and struggling to make rent on the shared apartment she found herself crashing in. She hadn't really made any friends. At best, she had made what could be charitably called contacts. She felt like an outsider, and being able to walk off a gunshot kind of cemented that feeling. The thing was, she didn't really know what to do. She had a total of 0 clues about who, what, or how she was. No one had come forward to claim her as a friend or family. The doctors found her to be a curiosity, but not in any immediate danger. And in an era when the state's hospitals were overflowing with the sick and dying, a curiosity without insurance wasn't worth keeping around. So she'd just sort of been plodding through her life, waiting for something to happen. She knew she should be doing something, but in a weird, detached way, Alana remembered that she had opinions, but she didn't remember why they'd formed. What had she been through to make her think it was okay, for example, to get in a fistfight with the police? Why did she prioritize human life so highly? Why did she know how to use a gun if she also knew she kind of hated them? She knew she hated guns, but her hands could do things with them that she didn't want to think about too hard. It was how, in math class, a teacher would tell you to show your work. Alana had the answer, but no work to get there. How had she arrived without understanding the process? So she'd been languishing, trapped. She took part-time work and did odd jobs, some of them for people who were very obviously criminals. She paid for a place to sleep, accumulated some spare furniture, and spent a lot of time trying to Google solutions to amnesia. She didn't really talk to anyone that much. It was hard to connect with people when Alana didn't have a background to draw on. And yet, she could instantly understand what other people were feeling. Another skipped step, an answer with no progress. And then another fight. Not the first one she'd been in, but possibly the stupidest. 2 of the local boys in blue laid out by a single girl, and she'd taken their guns. It had seemed fair, but it also meant it was probably time for her to leave. Because the guns weren't the only thing she'd gotten from them. She had a lead now, a single flash of a distant memory, maybe no more than a fantasy, maybe just her brain playing tricks on her, but it felt so real, and it wasn't like Alana had anything else to be doing anyway. That thought had been what pushed her out of the stagnant loop. She didn't have anything better to do. What was she doing with her days, anyway? Saving up for a phone with internet access? Taking jobs that paid out half in cash, half in pot? Fucking around, wandering the town like a lost puppy, waiting for someone to recognize her? Alana didn't belong here. And now, while she didn't know exactly where she was supposed to be, she did know it definitely wasn't here. Wasn't Florida, wasn't Safety Harbor, wasn't this shitty apartment in a shitty neighborhood with shitty people who kept trying to steal her weed when she wasn't home. She'd traded the guns, along with most everything else she owned, to a man named Channy, who was missing as many scruples as he was teeth. In exchange, she had gotten a '92 Honda CR-V that had been in 2 accidents and was missing any sign of ever having had a back seat. It smelled like old dirt on the inside, and it took 3 tries to start. It was perfect. It was a glorious chariot that would lead her north, and it had instantly required the rest of her savings to get the leak in the gas tank fixed, not to mention bargaining and scraping up a few coins to hit a thrift shop to grab a backpack and a pillow with a couple of blankets to pad out the back seat. But after that, it was perfect, and without saying a single goodbye, she hit the road north. Alana was free. Freedom wasn't the car, or the case of granola bars she'd liberated from the shipping dock of the grocery store she worked at for a couple of weeks, or even her bulletproof skin. To be free was to realize that she owned herself, that her mistakes and her victories were her own. To have a goal, however foolish, to strive for. To know that she could leave when she wanted, do what she wanted, be beholden to no one but herself and her own honor. Honor. What a strange word. It showed up often in her thoughts. She didn't know what had happened to her to make it the forefront of so many of her obfuscated opinions, but it must have been something powerful. Alana had something more than just opinions. She had convictions. And even though she didn't fully understand the why of them, she knew who she was through them. She'd work with criminals. She'd rob a company blind. She'd literally fight law enforcement. But she'd never hurt anyone who didn't ask for it. She'd never be less than her best when she tried. Now, driving away from where she felt so trapped, the gears in her head clicked into place, and she understood that, fully. All or nothing. There was something so familiar there, a spicy sweet touch on the edge of her thoughts. Her foot hit the gas a little harder, and she winced as the derelict car made a noise. But then the rumbling passed, and the acceleration kicked in properly, and she was flying down the highway and free. "Hey!" Elle's voice cut into the stale air of the ranch home. "Mom? I'm home!" The last word cut off abruptly and with an indignant squawk from Elle as her mother barreled into her from the side, wrapping thick arms around her errant daughter. Elle was not tall. At about 5'2" and change, she had never been one to tower over anyone she met, and yet she still dwarfed her mom, standing head and shoulders over the smaller woman who'd raised her. And for all that, she still couldn't stop herself being crushed and almost lifted off her feet by the excitable matriarch. "Oh, sweetheart, you're back!" Her mother squeezed her hard enough that Eleanor felt like her ribs were going to crack. "I was so worried. Are you hurt? Are you all right? Are you in any trouble?" The questions came in a barrage of concerned words. Elle's mom had had her when she was pretty young, but even still, it always caught Elle off guard when her mom had more youthful energy than she did. "I'm fine, Mom," she sighed, kicking off her shoes while fending off any further assaults and trying not to get the melting snow on her socks. Hell, sorry I haven't called." Elle's mom stepped back, framed up Elle with outstretched hands, and took a look at her daughter. She'd cut her hair short again, was currently sporting the remains of a black eye, and continued to wear clothing that was probably very fashionable with the kids these days. The woman nodded once. "Good!" she exclaimed, and then without further preamble started punching Elle in the arm. "You didn't call! You didn't leave a note! You dropped out of college! What were you thinking?" "Ow! Mom! Ow! Stop! Fuck!" Elle recoiled from the assault, struggling to defend herself from someone who she was absolutely unwilling to hit back. "I'm sorry! Ow! Fuck! Mom! Cut it out!" "Months! You have been gone months!" her mom shouted at her. How such a small woman could produce a noise that would frighten away dragons, Elle wasn't quite sure, and she wasn't about to find out. "I thought you were dead! I thought—" Her mom's voice broke down, and soon she was hugging Elle instead of punching her. "I thought—" "I'm sorry, Mom. Really," Elle said, returning the hug, albeit with an aching shoulder. "I thought I don't know. I'm just sorry." "Well, you can explain it over dinner," her mother said, eventually relenting from the embrace. "I'm making fritters, and in the meantime, girl, you need a shower. Have you been living out of your car?" Yes." Elle winced. "Well, not my car. I mean, it is my car, but it's a different car." Go, clean up. I didn't rent out your room, even though I was sorely tempted, believe you me." Her mother shooed her off. "You can tell me all about your little adventure afterward." How exactly was she supposed to explain anything to her mom? Elle's life had taken a frighteningly bizarre trajectory a little over a year ago. First, she'd found out about the road that wasn't real. Then she'd started earning its magic, turning her life around bit by bit as she found the motivation to claw her way first into college and then into doing art again. She stopped hanging out with the people who'd mostly just been augmenting her misery. Her life had been not great exactly, but she'd had a job and two hobbies that actually mattered that her shitty job had helped her prop up. Then James and Alana had strolled into her life, scared the shit out of her by impersonating government agents, and sent her on a nation-spanning road trip to try to keep her family and sole remaining friend safe. The deep irony that she had landed on their doorstep 3,000 miles of road trip away was not lost on her, but it had happened anyway. And then, after all that, things got weird. Her road wasn't the only stupid, scary, weird place full of monsters and treasures. They had their own, and they just invited her in, treated her like a long-lost friend, apologized to her. Eleanor had almost felt the same connection back at them by the time she'd left. But she had left because she had met their enemies too, and killed their enemies alongside them. And no matter what kind of glorious adventures they'd shared before that, no matter how important and necessary it was, the smell of blood and gunpowder wasn't very easy to wash out. So she'd left. She'd taken the car she'd picked up on the trip, sadly non-magical, and the gifts that they had given her as she tried to sneak out, and Elle had made a beeline for home. And taken a few months to get here, too, because, as it turned out, you didn't really need dungeons and magic to have adventures. Elle stood in the shower of her old family home, scalding hot water, stripping away the sweat and dust and whatever the hell was in the slushy rain that was currently pouring down and pretending to be snow. It wasn't like she hadn't showered the whole time, but it was nice to have her own bathroom back, a familiar place from a familiar time. Not a motel, not somewhere she was staying after giving a helping hand. Home. A place to relax and take stock of herself. Holy shit, she had gotten into so much trouble winding her way back here. Not like life or death trouble, not usually, just meeting people. Elle had found herself feeling a lot more social than she ever was before, a lot more longing for small bits of personal contact. So when she rolled into a new small town or stopped at a diner, she talked to people. Gas station attendants, overnight clerks at motels, random people in coffee shops or at parks, just people. It had come surprisingly easy to her. The old anxiety of talking to other humans was just kind of dwarfed by the sort of live-or-die fights she had gotten into. But it turned out that people had problems, and while some of those problems seemed pretty banal to Elle, she was there, right? There was no harm in helping out. She could give someone a ride to the hospital. She could help you move while your ex was at work. She could absolutely get your shitty boss in trouble. She could talk to anyone for you if you needed a neutral voice, or listen if you needed an indifferent ear. A retirement home robbing its residents, that was something she could handle. Someone needed to make a stupid, over-the-top romantic gesture to the guy that you wanted to take to prom, that was just a hobby. By her reckoning, Elle had become the quirky side character just passing through about 50 separate coming-of-age novels. She had gotten a lot of thankful free nights on a couch, free meals, and 2 separate marriage proposals, but she had never stuck around. Elle got out of the shower, not bothering to hide how stiff her movements were here behind the doors of the bathroom. From the bag she'd brought with her, she brought out fresh bandages to change the ones over her wounds. Okay, maybe there had been a few more serious problems. But she'd only been shot once, and the doctor had said the stitches would dissolve on their own as the wound healed, so that one was mostly okay, as long as she kept it clean. It barely hurt anymore anyway. It was the stab wound on her arm that really ached, and not just because her mom had been punching it. That one had gotten a lot of gravel and dirt in it before she'd gotten help, but at least the gash between her breasts was nothing more than an angry pink scar now. That one almost looked cool if you were into scars. Elle wasn't into scars, especially not having scars, because that meant that she had to do something to get the scar. But it did make her look kinda cool. Overall, she blamed James. Blaming James had become a hobby of hers, really. It was possible that it was going to replace going into highway hell on the list of her top-tier hobbies. She wasn't sure if she was ever going to feel the drive, pun vaguely intended, to head back into the dungeon again, but blaming James for the changes she'd gone through, that had a certain satisfaction to it. She didn't want to be like him and his people. She didn't want to put others first, to give altruistically, to be irritatingly optimistic all the fucking time. She wanted to relax and not pay for her meals and maybe get back into spray paint as an artistic medium. And yet, here she was, injured in a half dozen ways from trying to do the right thing, because it turned out it wasn't that fucking hard to do the right thing, but it was really hard to walk away once you saw it. And once you knew how to ask and where to look, there were a million little problems that needed to be solved, that weren't being solved. Fucking James. And Momo, too. Momo was the one who was really at fault here. If she had just not helped out the soaking wet, exhausted mystery girl standing outside their secret clubhouse, all of this moral questioning could have been avoided. Elle finished drying off and got dressed. The worst part, the absolute insufferable truth of this, is that she was fucking happier now than she was at the start. And she knew that was their fault, too. Elle groaned to herself as she rifled through her old room, trying to find any of her sweatpants that had survived the last 2 years. Well, the easy part was over. She'd made it home. She'd improved as a person. She had a second car. If her original car hadn't been stolen, she'd be shocked if it was still there and intact, but if not, then her mom could have this one and not need to worry about bus schedules anymore. Her room was easy to ransack because despite being both an artist and amateur mechanic, Elle did love keeping things clean. Organized, at least. Her pants were where they were supposed to be, just like her brushes, stack of canvases, and semi-contained piles of different projects sitting on her desk. The whole place was comfortably familiar, just as she'd left it. No matter how long she'd been on the road or staying in the dorm for college, this place felt like home. It made it easy to unwind, to let her guard down, and to see how she actually felt inside. And she knew, of course, she knew in her bones that she would be getting back on the outside highway. Hell, she'd probably even call up Momo, maybe Spirecast behind, too, ask if they wanted to take a road trip with her. She sort of missed Momo. The less easy part, working through the trauma of taking part in an actual war, was still in progress. But now that she was home, Elle didn't feel like it was quite so impossible to just call and ask anymore. Now, the hard part. Explaining literally any of that to her mother, who was currently cheerfully singing and burning something in the kitchen. Even deciding how much to explain was a question she had to answer to herself before she walked downstairs. The order was pretty clear that secrecy wasn't a mandate, but how do you start to tell someone that you could do magic, that you had friends now that weren't human? This is probably going to be a weird dinner. It was a cold evening, the long nights of winter still bringing the sun down before anyone could really enjoy a sunset. Combined with the almost abrupt descent into darkness and the fact that it was a weekend, it meant there was almost no one on the streets and sidewalks. Especially not in the area around here, where the closest thing to a destination was a Burgerville and a gas station about a block in the other direction. This made it the perfect weather for taking a walk. Morgan and Color of Dawn moved at a fairly leisurely pace. The human didn't really go on walks that often. Usually his method of transportation was someone else's car or running. Similarly, the Camerconda didn't go on walks very often, because being an unknown non-human wandering the streets of a modern, semi-suburban area wasn't a great idea in general. So they were sort of feeling out their shared pace and route. They weren't really going anywhere in particular, just walking, or slithering. Anywhere and nowhere. Around, as it were. They'd both wanted to get out of the lair for a while. As kind as everyone had been to him, Morgan still felt like an outsider. He basically lived there now, having permanently occupied one of the basement bedrooms, but it felt separate from him. Not even like a hotel, but like a guest room in someone else's house, full of someone else's furniture and someone else's small touches. He could leave whenever he wanted. He wasn't a prisoner, but he still had a lot of nervous energy about just hanging around the building and getting in people's way. Also, the Camercondas. He still didn't know how to reconcile the feeling in his chest that they expected something of him, with the polite way they kept their distance when he asked. Sometimes he just needed actual distance. On the other side of the sidewalk, Color of Dawn had a lot of similar feelings for very different reasons. The lair was as close to home as home could be. It did belong there in a strange way, but that didn't stop it from feeling like an outsider twice over. The other Camercondas were, in a way, trying to build their own culture. They had continued learning their style of art, their expressions of relationships and religion, but none of these things spoke to Color of Dawn, especially not the faith they cultivated. So Color of Dawn didn't fully belong with them, even though actual rejection was something that never happened. And then there were the humans. They came in a riot of plumages and personalities, flitting from project to project with the energy of one of the great sheet swarms. Every one of them treated Color of Dawn with kindness, compassion, and empathy, to varying levels. And yet, at the end of the day, it didn't feel as though any of them actually understood. Or perhaps it was Color of Dawn that didn't understand. Either way, there was a barrier there. Participating in two cultures, and the third that formed with their friction point, but a member of none of them. Morgan and Color of Dawn were friends, largely because they didn't have to say much to get where the other one was coming from. Too much kindness made them nervous. Too much introspection did too. So they were out roaming the dark streets, blowing off nervous energy, and being alone together for a while. There was no rule that said that Camercondas had to stay at the lair. It was just that most were, perhaps correctly, nervous about going out. But with a human chaperone, it didn't feel quite so threatening out here. Also, the streets really were pretty empty. Which was how the two of them found themselves making their way through the rapidly cooling night, occasionally making small talk. I'm thinking of trying to get James to let me do a podcast or something, Morgan idly commented. Want to help? Where do you cast it to? What? The pods. Color of Dawn's reply was in the same mechanical tone as all of its words were, and yet somehow Morgan instinctively knew he was being fucked with. Rolling his eyes, he replied past the dry joke. I'm just bored. I figure we could take the stuff that happens around here normally and turn it into a story somehow. I don't know, I'm not very creative, but I want to do something. This could be fun. The Camerconda tilted in a questioning way. Is this not already? Sarah creates it. I've seen Sarah's thing. It's news, Morgan said. I mean more fiction, making stuff up, changing names, just telling stories. Color of Dawn made a chirp in a low electric tone. Considering, it said. That was all for that little exchange. They meandered on, falling quiet again. The thing was, they didn't actually have a lot in common. They got each other, but didn't watch the same movies or read the same books, didn't come from the same worlds, literally. When they did talk, it was either light chats or impossibly heavy discussions. Morgan had told Color of Dawn about his mom. Color of Dawn had talked about its own fears for the future. Then they'd both been drafted into a pickup basketball game, and the next thing they talked about had been Morgan furiously Googling what eggs were to satisfy the Camerconda's curiosity. It was an unusual foundation for a friendship, but it was strangely comfortable and very real. What this? Color of Dawn asked eventually, jerking its snout toward a piece of what looked like cardboard that was held in place off the dirt by their walking path. Looks like a sign for a real estate thing. Morgan glanced at it and answered with a shrug. The Camerconda nodded before following up. Real estate? Right. There are people who buy and sell property to make a profit. Because to use a property, you have to own it or get permission from whoever does, and the value of property changes sometimes, so they... Wait, maybe they also sell houses for other people? I'm actually not sure. He sighed. Talking to a Camerconda was a surefire way to end up questioning what you thought was normal about your world, and to learn just how little you had already learned. Not important, then, Color of Dawn decided, and they moved on. It was when they were moving single file down cracked concrete on an overgrown side street that Color of Dawn spoke again, breaking their mutual quiet. Speaking with James today. You were, or you will be? Have been, Color of Dawn clarified. Tenses were difficult to get down for someone who had lived a long time in a sort of timeless existence. Worries for you. Me? Why? Morgan kinda knew that was the case, but he hadn't had time to talk to James for a while. The dude was just busy all the time. Hell, he couldn't even make time for a haircut. Color of Dawn ducked under the thorny remnants of a raspberry bush, displaying the bizarre Camerconda ability that let them glide along the ground in a lot of weird positions. Thinking you are ignoring your mother, it said to Morgan. Denying by staying away. He thinks I'm in denial. Morgan had meant the words to come out as a question. Halfway through, he decided on an angry remark instead. But by the end of the sentence, he was just resigned. Because, well, why hadn't he gone to see his mom? To see her body, anyway. He didn't have a good reason. I don't know, he said, instead of any of that. I don't feel like I'm ready. I don't know when I'll be ready. The words came out feeling small, like the weakest possible defense. Should be speaking to someone, Color of Dawn suggested. What, like James? Morgan snorted. He won't understand. He has lost also, the Camerconda reminded him. But no, Lua, Marcy, Spire, people trained to hear. The therapists? They're busy, though, Morgan feebly countered. I can deal with this myself. Oh? Interesting. Do so. His walking partner challenged his words instantly. Morgan's face flushed red as he sputtered for a response. Right, this thing. Camercondas didn't have anything quite like politeness either. That or shame in a lot of ways, really. And as soon as Morgan remembered that, the embarrassment lost a lot of its sting. If you want to be confronted with questions of what you think is normal, well, at the end of the day, he knew the words weren't hostile. Color of Dawn was the closest thing to a friend Morgan had right now. The challenge wasn't meant to damage his social standing, which didn't exist, or make him feel like an idiot, which he did anyway. It was meant exactly as it was said. Put your money where your mouth is. You say you can handle it. Why aren't you handling it? Either do it or get help. The Camerconda was infuriating sometimes, but also, sometimes, having that little honest, well-meaning push was exactly what a person needed. Okay, Morgan said, stopping suddenly, his fists clenched, nerves on a painful edge of disaster. Okay, but only if you come with me. Color of Dawn had cleared a third of the block before noticing that Morgan wasn't following it. The Camerconda twisted around to look back at the statement, camera eye widening in mild alarm. What? Yeah, let's go. Like right now. It's not like there won't be someone there, right? Morgan declared. But can you come with me? That part came out quieter, with a worried desperation in his tone. Please? He added. Not... It was strange. Morgan had never heard a Camerconda lose their focus mid-sentence before, and yet here it was, happening. It would have been funny if it weren't so serious right now. Am not deserving. Color of Dawn trailed off, turning and starting to slither farther down the broken sidewalk, as if they could just resume their walk. Oh, fuck off, Morgan called after the retreating serpent. You don't get to just say that, he yelled at the Camerconda. We've talked about her. About his mom, who was dead. She would have loved you. You're not undeserving or whatever you think you are. Morgan wasn't thinking about what he was saying. He was just desperately trying to slap words onto his feelings and fire them off. She would not know, Color of Dawn retorted, turning finally and moving back toward Morgan, but still keeping distance. You do not decide. Yes, I do. She was my mom, Morgan snapped back. Who else is supposed to decide? Color of Dawn hissed at him. It is our belief, it declared. Our choice. You don't believe in her, Morgan reminded the snake. They were getting into a touchy ecclesiastical territory, but of every human in the lair, Morgan was pretty sure he understood the Camerconda's religion better than anybody. You believe in you, and you don't get to just decide what she would have wanted. Morgan's shoulders slumped, his energy for the argument draining away rapidly. With a resigned motion, he dropped down to the pavement and settled in to sit on the curb. She was my mom for my whole life, he quietly said, glancing over at Color of Dawn, who was worriedly approaching from the street. Me, too. Color of Dawn had turned its volume down, no longer shouting. Us. She made too, remember? Morgan suddenly found himself angry. Really actually angry. The kind of irresponsible burning that you got when you knew you were on the edge of saying something that you couldn't take back. Why the fuck don't you just do what the rest of you do and leave me alone like James asked? He demanded. Color of Dawn recoiled slightly, aperture of its single eye narrowing into a point. I'm not like them. Its voice crackled as it responded. Why not? Morgan yelled at his friend. Because I killed her. The words came out as loud as the Camerconda could make them, distortion playing around the edges of its synthesized voice. Morgan's eyes went wide. A split second later he lunged forward off the curb, rough concrete scraping against cold flesh as he reached for Color of Dawn with outstretched arms. He froze in midair, 2 feet away from the Camerconda. Color of Dawn stared at him, lens wide with fear. Morgan, unable to move, regarded the Camerconda back. He wanted to feel hurt, wanted to feel his blood boil or his heart pound, but even that was on hold right now. He didn't know what he was feeling, and in those few seconds he was given a golden opportunity to think. Then Morgan watched as Color of Dawn shuddered slightly, the Camerconda's pseudo-real muscles tensing up as if to run or strike or move in some way. But before Morgan could even really worry about that, Color of Dawn dipped its head. Its lens closed, it broke contact, and let Morgan go, and just slumped forward to point its snout toward the ground. When Morgan was 13, his supposedly best friend had ruined one of his favorite comic books. It had been an accident, obviously, now, but Morgan had taken it hard. He'd snapped, yelled, even tried to punch the other teenager. They'd never sat down and hashed out how their dynamic was changing, but it changed all the same. Into silent resentment at the halls at school, and no more afternoons hanging out. Morgan's mom had noticed, despite working 10-hour days at the time. She'd sat him down and asked if he thought he could do better than he had. Not questioning what he did wrong, not in order to go apologize, just asking if he could do better. And by that point, of course, Morgan had run over what he could say 1,000,000 times in his head, so of course he said yes. He'd known the whole time, he'd just been too angry or too scared to approach his not-really friend anymore and say it. By the time he'd worked up the courage to try, though, it was too late. His friend had changed schools, they just never interacted again. Their lives never intersected. He spent too long being mad, and then when he wasn't mad anymore, being embarrassed for making a dumb mistake. In the moment when he found himself locked in place, he remembered that stupid little fight and that stupider loss. Morgan crashed into the asphalt with both knees, feeling the rocky surface cut through his jeans slightly. His arms were still out in front of him, hands extended in grasping claws. Color of Dawn was right there within his reach, unmoving, devoid of any kind of resistance or reaction. And without really taking time to think about it, Morgan reached out and wrapped his arms around the shuddering Camerconda and pulled his friend into a hug. I don't care, he said. But I did, Color of Dawn spoke at a volume that was almost inaudible. I did it. I don't care, Morgan whispered back loudly, burying his face in the crook of the Camerconda's coils. He remembered, vividly, painfully, something his mom always used to say. something that he never really believed or understood how she could be so stupid as to think it. He remembered her telling it to him when they had to move, twice, when both his parents got fired, when his best friend moved away, when his next best friend died. Every time he found himself crying in his room, his mom would find him and tell him words like they were some kind of magic spell. And as stupid as he thought they were, Morgan knew now why she thought they were important, and he spoke them out loud. "It'll be all right," he whispered to the Camerconda. "We'll get through this." And in that small moment of impulsive forgiveness and support, he felt his own strength that he hadn't known that he had, and he knew what his mom had seen every time she had said it to him. It would be all right, together.